My 23rd birthday dinner went silent the second my mother laughed and said, "She'll never be able to buy a home. Her sister already lives in a mansion." The words landed, harder than the clink of silverware against porcelain. Around the table, a few relatives forced awkward smiles while others stared down at their plates, pretending they hadn't heard. My older sister leaned back with the satisfied confidence of someone who had always been my mother's favorite. I felt every pair of eyes drift toward me, waiting for the embarrassed laugh, the apology, or maybe the tears they expected. My chest tightened, but years of practice had taught me that silence can be louder than any argument. I simply smiled. The smell of birthday candles still hung in the air, mixing with the rich aroma of roasted food that suddenly tasted like ash. My mother wasn't finished. She reminded everyone how my sister had made it, while I was still renting a tiny apartment and trying to figure life out. Every sentence sounded rehearsed, as if she'd been saving this speech for my birthday. No one defended me. That wasn't unusual. Growing up, every achievement of mine had been compared to my sister's. Straight A's weren't enough because she graduated first. My promotion didn't matter because she married wealthy. Every milestone somehow became another reason I fell short. As my mother laughed with the rest of the family, I reached into my purse and wrapped my fingers around a small metal keyring. I'd spent 2 years keeping one secret. And before this birthday dinner ended, everyone at that table would finally understand why. My name rarely came up in my family unless it was followed by a comparison. If my sister bought something expensive, I was asked why I couldn't earn more. If she posted glamorous vacation photos, my mother proudly shared them with everyone while quietly skipping over anything I accomplished. Somewhere along the way, I stopped trying to compete because I realized the finish line kept moving. I wasn't lazy or unsuccessful. I worked long hours as a financial analyst, saved every bonus, drove the same used car for 5 years, and skipped vacations that my coworkers insisted I deserved. While everyone assumed I was barely getting by, I was quietly building a future no one knew existed. My sister loved attention, and my mother loved giving it to her. Their relationship revolved around appearances, designer handbags, luxury neighborhoods, and expensive dinner parties. Mine was built on discipline, patience, and privacy. To them, that looked ordinary. Whenever relatives visited, my mother introduced my sister as her success story. I became the daughter who was still figuring things out, even though I paid every bill without asking anyone for help. I learned that correcting people only invited more criticism, so I let them believe whatever made them comfortable. Being underestimated became strangely useful. People reveal their true character when they think you've already lost. They stop hiding their insults, stop watching their words, and never imagine you're quietly preparing a move they won't see coming. That birthday wasn't the beginning of my story. It was simply the day I decided everyone else had seen the wrong ending. The birthday dinner continued as if my mother's comment had been completely normal. Conversations drifted back to vacations, promotions, and real estate. But every few minutes, someone found a way to circle back to my sister's mansion. Each compliment aimed at her seemed to carry a quiet reminder of what they believed I would never have. My mother kept glancing at me between bites, almost waiting for me to defend myself. When I didn't, she smiled into her wine glass with quiet satisfaction. "Some people just aren't meant for big dreams," she said casually, as though she were discussing the weather instead of her own daughter. A few relatives exchanged uncomfortable looks, but no one interrupted. Silence had become the family's safest language. My sister joined in without missing a beat. She laughed softly and said, "Owning a home isn't for everyone. Renting gives you flexibility." Pause before the last word made. The table chuckle. It wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. I folded my napkin carefully and listened. No one noticed how calm I was, because while they were measuring success by appearances, I was remembering every holiday where my accomplishments were ignored, every birthday gift that somehow became about my sister, and every family gathering where I was treated like the supporting character in someone else's life. Their confidence came from believing they knew everything about me. They knew my apartment. They knew my salary from years ago. They knew the version of me that always stayed quiet. What they didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd signed papers no one in that room had ever imagined I'd be holding, and the proof was resting silently inside my purse. My mother lifted her glass for a birthday toast and smiled as if she had spent the evening celebrating me instead of cutting me down. "Here's to finding your place someday," she said. A few people laughed politely, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. That was the moment I realized nothing would ever change if I kept protecting people who had never protected me. For years, I'd mistaken silence for patience. I thought that if I worked harder, saved more, and stayed humble, eventually my family would see me for who I really was. Instead, every achievement disappeared behind another comparison. They weren't waiting for me to succeed. They were waiting for me to fail. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt finished. Without rushing, I reached into my purse and placed a small envelope beside my plate. My heartbeat stayed steady. Inside were the keys I'd carried every day. Since the closing appointment, 3 weeks earlier, I'd kept the purchase private because I wanted it to belong to me before it became anyone else's conversation. My mother noticed the envelope and frowned. "What's that?" she asked with a dismissive smile. I slid it across the table. "Actually," I said quietly, meeting her eyes for the first time that evening, "about what you just said." She opened the envelope. A single house key, a garage remote, and the property card slid onto the white tablecloth. Then she read the address. The smile she'd been wearing all night disappeared before anyone else at the table understood why. The silence that followed wasn't luck. It was the result of 2 years of planning that no one had bothered to notice. While my family measured success by what could be photographed, I measured it by what could be owned outright. Every month I transferred part of my paycheck into a separate savings account before spending a single dollar. I studied housing markets after work, tracked mortgage rates, compared neighborhoods, and met with a financial advisor to understand exactly what I could afford without risking my future. When I finally found the right property, I didn't tell anyone. I hired a respected real estate attorney to review every document, read every page of the purchase agreement myself, and refused to rush simply because the market was competitive. The inspection reports, financing paperwork, and closing documents were organized neatly in a folder long before my family even suspected I was house hunting. The best part wasn't that I had bought a home. It was where I had bought it. The address on that property card belonged to the same prestigious neighborhood. My mother constantly praised whenever she talked about my sister's mansion. My home wasn't larger or flashier, but it was on the very next street, a quiet, beautiful house I could genuinely afford without depending on anyone else. I hadn't bought it to impress my family. I bought it to prove something to myself. Handing my mother those keys wasn't an act of revenge born from anger. It was evidence that her opinion had never been the limit on my future, only the limit of her imagination. No one spoke for several long seconds. The only sound was the soft hum of the restaurant and the faint clink of a server placing dishes at a nearby table. My mother read the address once, then a second time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less unbelievable. My sister leaned forward and gently took the property card from her hands, the confidence she'd carried all evening faded the moment she recognized the neighborhood. She looked at me, then back at the card, searching for an explanation that would make sense of everything she'd assumed about me. "There has to be some mistake," she whispered. "There isn't," I replied calmly. I reached for my glass of water instead of the spotlight. I didn't list the sacrifices I'd made or the years I'd spent saving. The documents in front of them spoke more clearly than any speech ever could. Around the table, the conversation dissolved into uneasy silence. The relatives who had laughed only minutes earlier suddenly avoided my eyes. One quietly congratulated me. Another admitted they had no idea I'd been planning such a major purchase. Their reactions weren't dramatic, they were honest, and somehow that carried more weight. My mother's expression shifted from disbelief to something she couldn't hide. For the first time in years, she had no comparison left to make. I smiled, not because she'd been embarrassed, but because I finally understood something she'd never taught me. Real success doesn't need permission. I picked up my keys, slipped them back into my purse, and thanked everyone for coming to my birthday. Then I walked out of the restaurant knowing the loudest victory I'd ever earned had arrived in complete silence. The days after my birthday were quieter than I expected. My phone, which usually stayed silent after family gatherings, suddenly filled with messages. Aunts and cousins congratulated me, some admitting they had believed the same story my mother had repeated for years, that I was struggling, while my sister had everything figured out. Seeing the truth forced them to question how easily they'd accepted someone else's version of my life. My mother called twice before I answered. She didn't apologize. Instead, she asked why I had kept such a big purchase a secret. I simply told her the truth. Because every milestone of mine has always become someone else's competition. She had no response. My sister stopped making casual jokes about my career or apartment. Whether it was embarrassment or respect, I couldn't tell. But the comparisons quietly disappeared. Family dinners became different. People asked about my work instead of assuming they already knew the answer. It wasn't perfect, but the balance had shifted. The biggest change, though, happened inside me. For years, I believed my worth depended on convincing the people closest to me that I deserved their respect. That birthday taught me something far more valuable. Self-worth grows the moment you stop asking people to see what they've already chosen to ignore. That's why this story matters. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't ruining someone else's reputation, it's refusing to let their opinion become your identity. The people who underestimate you often build their confidence on incomplete information. You don't have to argue with them. You only have to keep building the life they never imagined you could create. And when the truth finally arrives, it speaks for itself. A few weeks after my birthday, I unlocked my front door for the first time as more than just a homeowner. It finally felt like home. The walls were still bare, boxes were stacked in corners, and the furniture didn't match. But every room represented a decision I had made for myself, not to impress anyone else, not to win an argument, and certainly not to prove my mother wrong. I spent my first evening on the back porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the quiet. No applause, no comparisons, no voices telling me I wasn't enough, just the steady comfort of knowing that everything around me had been built through patience, discipline, and faith in my own path. My relationship with my family never became perfect. We spoke, celebrated holidays, and slowly learned new boundaries. My mother became more careful with her words, and my sister stopped treating life like a competition. Whether those changes came from regret or simple reality no longer mattered to me. I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. Looking ahead, my goals felt different. I wanted to travel, invest wisely, and someday help another young woman believe that quiet determination can be stronger than loud confidence. Success, I realized, isn't measured by who applauds when you arrive. It's measured by the peace you feel once you've stopped chasing applause altogether. The keys I slid across that birthday table opened more than a front door. They unlocked the life I had spent years building in silence and closed the door on every doubt that was never mine to carry.